Hey everyone, MSX here, and I just wanted to share my impressions on the DualShock 4 controller. So, as you might know, Sony were rolling out these kiosks to GameStop where you could try the PS4. Just so happened to be a kiosk right near me. So, I took the walk over to the GameStop and decided to try it out. Microsoft, where's your Xbox One kiosks? Anyways, so I tried out the DualShock 4, and I have to say it is a gigantic improvement over the DualShock 2 and 3. Not quite sure about DualShock 1, I haven't tried it, but since Sony seemed to recycle that controller longer than Nintendo recycled Pokemon gimmicks, I'm going to assume DualShock 1 same as DualShock 2. Anyways, so there were a couple negatives with the controller, and I want to get those out of the way first before I praise how much better it was than DualShock 3. And the first negative I had to point out was actually the length of the handles. I know Sony said they extended them, but I'm just gonna hope this is a pre-production controller they had on the kiosk, because those handles, they were not longer. They felt almost the same length as the DualShock 3. In fact, when I was holding the controller, the handles didn't even fill up my hand entirely. It could also have been the way I was holding it to get to the analog sticks, and I'll talk about that in a second. But when I was holding that DualShock 4, it did not occupy my entirety of the hand like the 360 controller does. As such, it felt a little awkward, and mostly a little awkward. And I even have to say, a tad uncomfortable, because you have this giant cylinder just only in half of your hand. There's nothing in the bottom half, like where your ring finger and pinky finger would be when you clench and make your fist. Like I said, that could just been me how I was holding the controller to get to the analog sticks. Which brings me up to negative number 2. Yes, they are better than the DualShock 3 controller, but oh my god, Sony, what did you do with the height? I swear, when I was holding using the controller, it seemed like they raised the analog sticks a good 3 miles. Like, when I wanted to push up on the analog stick, and I have really long fingers if you've seen my hands in some of my videos, but when I pushed up on that controller, on the control sticks, I could not get my thumb around it. I had to push in the direction from the side, almost practically underneath. That is definitely not good. Like I said, I hope that's just a pre-production thing, but yeah, the only time I have to push a control stick up from the side is on my 3DS, and that's because the control stick, or control pad, or circle pad, that's what it's called, is incredibly slippery. But with the DualShock 4, I had to push it from the side because they made the sticks way too frickin' high. And because of that, going back to the handles, that's probably why, when I was holding the controller, I couldn't have the entire controller in my hands. I had to hold it practically from the bottom of the handles, just so I could push on the analog sticks properly. Like I said, this could just be a pre-production controller before they refined it a little more, but if they don't fix this with the final release, this controller is probably going to take a giant nosedive like the DualShock 3, and I'm probably going to end up disliking my PS4. Because if I can't hold the controller comfortably to play, I might as well just throw away the system, because I'm not going to be able to use it. And after all that negative ranting, it's time to look at the positives, since there are a lot more positives. Overall, even though the handles are a little smaller, the DualShock 4 controller is overall a lot bigger than DualShock 3. So saying that, yes, even though I did hold the controller awkwardly just to be able to use it okay, I will say with the controller being overall a little bigger, it does feel much better to hold than the DualShock 3 controller. What else? The handles, they're cylinders. They're completely circular, unlike the DualShock 3 handles, which seemed like they squished, like it was cylinder-like, and then they squished it. These were completely circular, so I actually like that a little better. For some, it just feels a little It feels a little more comfortable to wrap your hand around a complete circle rather than a squish circle. So there's that. Ergonomically, they improved that slightly. The triggers, which I know is probably the worst factor of the DualShock 3. It is really good on the DualShock 4. Basically, even though it seemed like they swoop out like the 360 controller, the swoop isn't as exaggerated, so the trigger almost seems flat, but because of that swoop, it does have like a little dip in it, so when you put your finger in there to press the trigger, your finger feels like it's secure. It's not going to move off that trigger at all. So I have to say the triggers are definitely one of the highlights of the controller. They are definitely really good. The swoop isn't as exaggerated as the 360 controller triggers, but because this is a textured plastic and it does have that little dip, your finger definitely doesn't feel like you're going to slip off. With the 360 controller, if you do game a lot, your finger might slip off of that because it's a hard, shiny plastic. This is textured, so when you press on that trigger, your finger isn't going anywhere other than inward. So, what was probably the worst factor of the DualShock 3 controller is probably one of the best factors for the DualShock 4. Even though I know they announced this before, I do want to touch on again with how much better the DualShock 4 is. Fortunately, it will work on the PS3, even though you will have to use your USB cable. You have to plug it in. You can't use it wirelessly, but at that rate, I'd say it's worth it, because the DualShock 4 is definitely leaps and bounds better than DualShock 3. I don't know, from more so in personal experience, I'm going to be thinking DualShock 2, because I didn't have my PS3 for that long, because I just didn't like that system at all. So let's see, what else is there? The buttons felt really nice. I haven't touched my DualShock 2 in a while, so I don't know how squishy they're supposed to be, but the buttons on the PS4, the face buttons, are supposed to be a lot more responsive, not as squishy. They did have a really nice click. They did feel really good, I will give them that. Better than the 360 buttons. They feel better than the Wii U buttons as well, so right now, that's, I think, the most solid feeling buttons you can get. D-pad I really didn't try or play around with much, so sorry, I have no opinion on that. Going back to the control stick, even though I did complain about how they are really bad with how high they are, what I will say is it's made of a soft, textured rubber. So, if you actually do put your thumb on top of the stick for the little while before you actually start playing, or have to move it off to the side to push from the bottom, at least the thumbsticks do feel nice and soft. They do feel better than DualShock 2 and 3 sticks, which is like it's a little bit harder rubber with the concave design. These feel a lot more softer. They feel like if you're going to be gaming a lot longer, these feel like they're going to be a little more pleasant to the touch than the harder DualShock 3 and 2 control sticks. If only they just weren't so frickin' high. The touchscreen. Unfortunately, since I just played the NAC demo, that didn't really use the touchscreen, but I did feel around. Even though when they're saying capacitive touchscreen, I was thinking it's going to be slippery plastic like the back of the PS Vita, but it actually feels more like the top of a DSi. You feel a DSi, that's basically how the touchpad almost feels like. And like they said, you can press either on the left or right side of the touchpad and access extra buttons. What they will use that for, I don't know, but the touchpad did feel okay. But at least a little negative I did have with it was because the control stick seems so freaking high on the DualShock 4. It seemed to me like a chore to get back to the touchpad. Will this be something they fix on the retail controllers? I don't know, but at least from personal experience, the control sticks are ruining the controller. The control sticks are ruining the controller. Yeah, I cannot talk this late at night. Aside from the control sticks, though, the rest of the controller, like I said, is leaps and bounds better than the DualShock PS3 controller, and it's definitely the DualShock controller that you should be using with your PS3, since it is backwards compatible, and will work for PCs as well. So yeah, I guess that's it on the controller. It did have the PS4 there. Looking at the PS4 in person, it is definitely a lot bigger than the pictures on the internet make it out to be. So, is it bigger than the PS3, the original PS3? Considering I haven't seen the original PS3 in a long time, and there is a comparison from someone uploaded, I think it's a little smaller than the original PS3, but it's definitely still a big console. It does look a little nicer in person, I guess, although, like I did say on Skype one time, as not my status, I still think this is the ugliest generation of consoles. The Wii U, PS4, Xbox One, they just all look terrible. They just look bland and boring. I think sadly the last generation is probably the one with the most, I guess, decent looking consoles. But Sega Genesis, boy, I can't freaking talk tonight. It's only 11. Anyways, Sega Genesis, these consoles do not look like. So, I guess if you want your Xbox One that went through a wind tunnel, you get the PS4. It just made no sense. But then again, I'm half asleep, so I think I should end this video now before I continue sounding like an idiot. So, thank you guys for listening, and until next time, I shall see you later.